Welcome to Conveyancing Matters with Lorraine and Stu. Join us for a chat about all things property.
Well, Mr. Forsdyke, how are you?
Well, I'm not too bad. How are you?
Yeah, I'm all right, thanks, lovely. Well, we had a little bit of chat off air and thought we couldn't really have a Conveyancing Matters and be 3 weeks into a major conveyancing organisation having a massive cybersecurity incident without talking about it. Certainly have absolutely no intention of gloating at all, quite the contrary, but there's quite a bit I think to unpick, Stu, now in relation to the Simplify incident, isn't there? So what are your thoughts? We've got a very, very large sort of umbrella conveyancing organisation with lots of conveyancing brands sitting beneath it that have had, 3 weeks ago now, give or take, clearly a massive security issue that's impacting thousands of transactions given their position in the market, and it's still not resolved. So what's your initial reaction as a firm owner, Stu?
Well, my initial reaction is I feel so much empathy for them. I feel really sorry for the guys that are having to deal with this because it's horrific. Your reputation's at stake, and of course just your ongoing process of working on files, all of a sudden you can't do. So all the guys that are involved there, I do feel really, really bad for them. But I think what it goes to show, though, is that, if one of the biggest brands in our industry has been targeted in this way, and I'm assuming the resource that they apply to their IT, it just shows you the risk that we all run and how much, it could happen to any of us at any time, couldn't it?
Yeah, I think this is the thing. And it's a strange one, isn't it? Because I am absolutely sure there are, commentators and people out there who were sort of, quietly gloating or possibly loudly gloating. But I do think, the broader point clearly is the fact that, there but for the grace go all of us, really. I mean, even small organisations that have, just got a bit of IT are still going to be at risk, aren't they? But I think one of the issues that I think about really more from the outside looking in now than I've been in the past, Stu, is this whole, is the size of them. And the fact that it's had sort of such an impact across the market because they are so big.
Yeah.
And that's clearly a concern. And even on their website, sort of, right now at the time of recording, it's not resolved by any means. They're saying, the majority of our conveyancing colleagues are back up and running. They're actively working on cases. Team are supported by external experts, working non-stop, reviewing next steps, but it got so bad that if firms wanted to contact them, there was a form, we had that, you had to contact them by a form, and it can perhaps I just think the impact across the industry can't be sort of underestimated, really, and it's hit the national news as well now. And I just think, it's just a concern, isn't it, really?
It's a major concern. There's two constraints here, isn't there? There's the, it's been all over the news now. There are clients that have suffered, hopefully not as many as it's being portrayed, as how these things can get out of hand on social media. And I've seen some of the tweets and the posts and stuff like that. And it's horrible. And I'm sure the guys, there are going for a really, really rough time, because at the end of the day, nobody would ever want this to happen. So I'm sure they're going for a really rough time, but it kind of demonstrates maybe the lack of knowledge that, a lot of people have in terms of what we do and the threats that we're always under. Yeah. When people moan about us asking for, whether we're talking about a transactional matter, such as ID and bank statements and KYC and all this stuff that we do, we have to do it for very, very valid reasons. And, with regards to sort of IT and cybercrime, there's a hidden layer that we wouldn't even talk about that's, company related or firm related, that costs so much money now. It's, if I look back when we first started, the consideration I had for IT was very, very, very minimal. But now, of course, it's a daily threat. And you've got two different sides of it, I suppose, haven't you? You've got the data that we hold, which is obviously really important. And of course, you've got a client account that's always, you know, holding extreme volumes of money in it. That I suppose as a target, what better companies could there be? And when you've seen the likes in the past of the NHS and the car phone warehouse, you know, other massive companies and corporates being hacked, you know, it only takes one person to be successful when you're being attacked every day for then, you know, you to feel the consequences.
Yeah, absolutely. And clearly there's and rightly, of course, about this particular incident, you know, there's not much in the public domain about, you know, what's actually happened, not least because there's a criminal investigation going on now. But the trouble is, and it's always bothered me about, and I think we should, Stu, at some point have a separate sort of specific chat about cybercrime, but assuming, you know, it was a cybercrime incident, just the risks that poses. And what always bothers me about particularly sort of cybercrime and training is that that sort of your staff are your biggest defense and your biggest threat at the same time. And what always bothers me about cybercrime is that it becomes a bit like the wallpaper. It just sits in the background. It's always there, and people stop thinking about it, and people stop noticing it. And I haven't a clue whether some poor soul at Simplify, you know, clicked on a dodgy email. I have absolutely no idea. But I do think that what this incident should be perhaps prompting from firms in terms of response is, okay, you know, right, let's get our cybercrime training back online. And one of the things I thought it would be worth mentioning for firms, because it's free and easy, is the National Cybersecurity Centre, actually, Stu. They've got absolutely stacks of resources on their website that anybody in firms would probably find really useful. But they do have actually a free little webinar, sort of, you know, top tips for staff around avoiding cybercrime. So the first thing that firms could do is, you know, send their staff to the National Cybersecurity website to just literally watch that. I think it's only about 15 minutes, because it's all about just, you know, not raising that awareness really, but bringing that awareness back to the surface. And I think that would be quite an easy, quick win for firms. But has it led you, Stu, and I think this is the other thing clearly firms should be doing, and I'm sure, to be fair, are doing, you know, nobody needs me to tell them, but is clearly to be conducting, you know, a review of their own IT, not policies as such, they're just the, you know, to my mind, they're just the written things that sit on the server that nobody reads, but your actual nuts and bolts, technical,
the practical side of what
firewalls, all of that stuff. I mean, has that led you to do that in the last 3 weeks, Stu?
Well, the very first moment I heard of it, the very first call I made was to our IT guy, because you think, Christ, you know, there are some simple things you can do, and I'm not holding myself out to be an IT expert, but, you know, doing things, stupid little things like maybe changing passwords and emails, stuff like that. It's something so simple, but because it's so simple, we kind of, you know, jog that to the back of the queue a bit and stuff like that. But I think now it's becoming such an integral part, probably of any company, let alone law firms. But, you know, IT now, it's a different world, isn't it? You know, we used to get, you know, somebody out the blue used to email you at 3 o'clock in the morning, couldn't construct a coherent email and saying click here to win £1 million. You know, they're not as blatant as that anymore, are they? I actually had one yesterday, an email that came through, and it was another, you know, reply or click here, but it was talking about panel membership with a bank. So, you know, the emails now that you get are so similar to what could be the truth.
Well, they're very, very sophisticated, and they're very
the sophisticated
good
side, and you know,
using logos and you know, and you'd have to look very, very closely at an email address to have the slightest alert. And I think the difficulty is where you've got, you know, a lot of sort of people sort of slogging away under the pressure that conveyancers have been slogging away under. I think sometimes these dodgy emails in particular, it's just that momentary gut instinct that perhaps you and I might have, and I absolutely, you know, I think I'm as, you know, I'm probably as much of a risk as anybody else, but I just think this sort of experience of looking at stuff for a long time makes you think, oh, I don't know, is that right? Whereas actually, maybe people that aren't so experienced might not necessarily do that. I mean, they might have better eyesight than me, Stu, and be able to notice a dodgy address. But
if I don't know, let's just say one of the guys here gets an email from supposedly Stuart Forsyth asking them to send £1,000, they're going to spot it, aren't they? However, what if they get an email from Joe Blogs, click here to access my ID, something like that? It could be so innocent, couldn't it? I think the stuff now, the attack that we're under is so educated, the terminology that's used.
Yeah.
And I think the fraudsters know the weak points, don't they? I don't think I haven't had an email, asking me to send monies abroad for absolutely ages now.
No.
It's much more, here's my client's ID, stuff like that. So
it's stuff you would expect to be receiving.
Yeah, you would expect to be receiving on a daily basis. It's, your emails are probably being monitored, and the fraudster picks up on the terminology that's used, the key points where you ask for things or things are supplied to you, and they replicate those trails, don't they? And that's where it becomes so dangerous. And of course, the other thing as well is it might not be you that gets hacked or you, it could be your client. So if you're receiving an email from a client that's all of a sudden their email address has changed, needs to be investigated. But so easy just to miss that, isn't it?
Yeah.
And also, on the different devices that we all now use, emails can be received and abbreviated anyway. It's, the due diligence you now need to apply to what you receive is on a level that it's never been before.
No. And of course,
I sometimes think when we talk about fees, there's so much more we now need to do because of all these different things, but particularly, cybercrime as well. And that's not to mention cybercrime insurance, which is a separate thing to discuss in a bit. But, the cost element of this is going through the roof.
And it will do. And these sorts of incidents, the Simplify incident will only sort of add grist to that mill, really.
Yeah.
And of course, the irony is
the premiums for cyber insurance, they were bad enough. They were bad enough this time round. But of course, you're going to be talking sort of the figures that are going to be applied over the years now due to this. But also, what else goes on in the world is incredible.
Well, I think there is just an inherent irony in what we do, Stu, that and I am now going to sound like a tragic old Luddite. I do get that, but there is an irony in the fact that tech and IT have theoretically made the conveyancing process so much easier and more streamlined, such that firms have been under significant pressure to push their fees down. Because of, automation, tech, IT and everything else. But of course, all it has done, and I increasingly take this view, actually, that all this does is shift the risk somewhere else. It does not eliminate it. And in many cases, it doesn't even mitigate the risk. All it has done is moved a risk that you had just there and moved it over there.
Yeah.
And a broader conversation, and next time we chat we'll no doubt talk about the Land Registry only accepting digital applications and digital ID, and that is absolutely the way of the world. That is absolutely the direction of travel. But I've always sort of rather dully sort of banged this little drum and said, but when a system is hacked, which it invariably will be, where is the liability then going to lie? For that, but Stu, and that's
it's going back to that, isn't it? There's always been risk, and in whatever way you do it, it's just a different risk type. Or I can remember a well-known estate agent having an issue, and this is going back so long. It was where papers were put in their bins, and people went down their bins and made fraud from papers in bins. So you can go right back. But I think the difference is, there's risk everywhere in terms of what we do, but the difference now is that it's probably easier for the fraudster. It's not easier for us, is it? But it's easier for the fraudster. And it's easier for them to mount multiple attacks multiple times because of technology enhancement, so it's become easier for them. In terms of what we do, there's been risk,
there's
in
always
whatever
been
way
risk,
you
and
want to flip that coin.
that sort of leads me into, clearly, because what this has sparked a bit on social media is the old, electronic versus paper argument, and should this incident cause firms to sort of reappraise the way they work and to think about maintaining paper files again. Well, I think if you've gone paperless, if you've gone electronic, I think that the concept that a firm would actually consider now, printing stuff off again and putting treasury tags in the corner of bits of paper into files is complete nonsense. And I don't think a firm is ever going to do that. I think firms that perhaps maintain paper and electronic, they're going to go one direction or the other, and presumably they're still going to end up going in the electronic direction. But I just don't think it's not a binary either or, because if you had paper files, Stu, well, they could get burnt, they could get accidentally shredded. I think the National Archive had a fire, didn't it, and lost a whole load of records. So that's why chancel searches aren't definitive. And was it Bradford and Bingley millions of years ago? They had a fire in their deed store.
I wasn't going to say there was a well-known bank that deed store burnt down and thousands of deeds were lost once upon a time.
So the idea that should we go back to paper files, I don't, that's not a compelling argument. And of course you do get and it's always worth I would recommend anybody having a look at Peter Ambrose's rather fantastic feeds on LinkedIn in particular, because he's been pretty he's made his views very strongly known about the IT issues, and because clearly he's very much an embracer of IT. But I don't think this sort of incident can ever really lead us back down the path of, well, should we ditch all IT and go back to paper? I mean, it's just nonsense, really.
It's increasing your sort of internal procedures to combat it, isn't it?
It is. Now there is, I still think there is probably something to be said for perhaps something of a hybrid model, but again, all that does is shift the risk, because if you've got a partial paper file, then that's still not going to have everything on it, which presents a different risk. It just moves the risk to somewhere else.
If you want to go down this road, you could talk about anything, couldn't you? You could talk about, do we go back to sort of paper ledgers where we handwrite everything in? I mean, how far do you want to go? How far do you want to take this? We live in a modern world.
Stone tablets were risky, Stu, if you drop them. So, it's all a bit, I think it's all a relative concept. But what I did think was more interesting, and I'm complete IT Luddite, and I don't say that with any pride at all. It's just my age, really. I'm just a bit hopeless. So I've come from no position of strength or knowledge at all. But one of the things that, in terms of what particularly larger organisations might presumably be thinking about doing, is the extent to which it's possible, sorry, that was me hitting my desk, is the extent to which it's possible to compartmentalize your IT processes, if that's at all possible. And I don't know whether it's possible or indeed financially practical, because what the Simplify website does point out is that there's two of their brands within their group, they operate separate IT systems and weren't affected. So that's quite an interesting
we've always done a similar kind of thing here. I always everything we do, I've always tried to have sort of an A and a B, so that you're not putting all your eggs in one basket. But I think they've managed to maybe mitigate some of that by the other brands that were able to trade.
I think perhaps one of the last things to talk about in relation to this issue, Stu, is what this security incident has given, shone a light on. Apart from, I do have the thought, and this is very much a personal view, but I do have the wonder, the thought in the back of my mind, if this was a smaller organisation, would they have been intervened in? Would they have been closed down by now? That's a difficult one, but I do worry about the too big to fail argument. I'm sure the regulator's all over it, but nonetheless, you can't help wondering how a smaller organisation would have fared. But the point I was going to make is, I don't
think a smaller organisation would have financially been able to cope with it anyway.
The
repercussions for that organisation are going to be absolutely huge, aren't they, from a financial point? And that could be immediate money's worth, but also future work and so on and so forth. But
Yeah.
I think you'll find this will shockwave through all law firms.
Yeah.
Because I think we all now have it at the front of our minds that actually, you know, is there anything we can do to improve?
Yeah, I think
and
that's
of course, improvements cost money.
Yeah, inevitably. I think there's lots of finance managers in law firms now looking at budgets and saying, well, you can't have that, you can't have that, because we're going to put a big chunk of it over there. But definitely. Yeah, well, I wondered also, Stu, maybe just to conclude this conversation, this issue does appear from social media, and that's as much as I want to, you know, I'd go so far as to say on the issue of, you know, the dreaded old referral fees. You know, the genie was let out the bottle quite a few years ago, the idea of law firms paying for, you know, referrers for work, which is legitimate and permitted, provided that the client knows. And there seem to be a lot of people saying, well, we didn't know about this. And it does make you wonder you know, for example, whether or not the regulators will think about bringing referral fees, and why they didn't, frankly, under the auspices of the transparency rules, because we have to stick our.
Yeah, I'm not a complete disbeliever in all this. Referral fees have been paid forever. Okay, if it wasn't a direct payment, it was a brown paper envelope. Okay, you can't tell me that, you know, in this day and age, referral fees in different disguises are paid in multiple industries all over the world, aren't they? I think to cut these out in terms of regulation would be worse. It would be the referral fees underground instead, won't they?
Well, I suppose in many ways, some would argue they always were. You know, the old boy network, the nice lunches, you know, you know, there was always going to be a fairly fine line. But what I wonder is, clearly there is a perception, at least, and I'm always quite, you know, I'm always take with a heavy pinch of salt when clients say, oh, didn't know, because it probably suits them not to know. And they don't read stuff, a lot of them, frankly.
How many clients really think that referral fees aren't paid? I'm not convinced. I mean, we make it explicit in our terms and conditions. That's part of our regulation. I'm sure that all lawyers under that simplified banner are exactly the same. There's no way that firm don't disclose what they do. And it's more that clients probably haven't read the terms and conditions.
No, I agree.
And because they're in a state of vexation, they're using whatever they can to throw at the wall, aren't they?
Yeah, no, I do completely agree with that view. But as I said, I wonder, you know, if it's considered to be an issue. Well, if the regulators, you know, why don't they just require firms to just put details of the organisations they've got referral arrangements with on their websites under the transparency rules? Why is that any different? You know, if the regulators were that bothered. Is
this a broken issue? I don't feel it is, though.
I think it's
we disclose to a client we pay a referral fee. Why do you pay a referral fee? Well, I pay a referral fee because when you get introduced to a client, it's a qualified client, isn't it? You know, I might have to quote 10 clients potentially to get one, do a lot of hand holding, whereas a referrer might do a portion of that work for me. So, you know, we pay a referral fee on that basis. I think, you know, referral fees now are, you know, they've been here for Christ knows how long, haven't they? Ever since I've been doing it, 25 years, referral fees have been paid.
Yeah, I mean, but I suppose the clue's in the title in terms of transparency. I mean, I think if it was just out there, it would just give, I think, clients even less opportunity to say, oh, no, didn't know. And I think
from a law firm's perspective, one of the things you'd be nervous of is you've got one introducer of work doesn't like other introducer of work, and you're disclosing that information in a public forum. Competitors would know who you get work from potentially. Not quite sure about that myself. I'm just not sure it's a broken issue. I think that's and from what I've seen where clients have been moaning, I'm not just sure that it's in a sort of current state of like I said, throwing everything that you can at the wall and seeing what sticks. But
yeah, I think that's right. I think but I think part of the problem might be it's always whether there's a perception of an issue, isn't it, really? And I think that's that there often isn't an issue, but if there's a perception that there is, then it's something that people will feel the need that they perhaps must do something about. You know, we must act. You know, for example, let's make firms that get more complaints pay more, for example. I don't know. It's actually, well, that's perhaps a different conversation, isn't it? But anyway,
complaints and legal ombudsman and stuff like that. That's
yeah,
a big old conversation that is for another day.
yeah, it is. It is actually. Yeah, we could be here for the rest of the day, Stu. Well, I think on a sort of practical concluding level, I think we do invariably wish the frontline staff, at the affected organisations well, because they just come off the back of the old stamp duty land tax holiday. That phrase that must get into the Oxford English Dictionary this year, mustn't it, for lawyers, as being one of the most overused phrases of the years. But almost, and you hope that the business is able to deal with it in a way that everything is preserved, really. I think particularly for the workers on the front line, because they're the grafters that will be dealing with just a lot of the day-to-day flack, I think.
Yeah, it's the bottom line. The people that's talking to clients, I can't think how awkward and horrible that must be for them.
Yeah, well, particularly when the clients haven't been able to get through to them for a number of days. But all right, Stu. Well, I think that sort of unpacked quite a lot, really, unexpectedly. So we'll sign off now, and I'll see you again soon.
I'll see you again soon. Have a good day.
Take care.